Hey, everybody. So, to pick up where we left off last time, we were talking about self sabotage. So, today we're
Mhm.
going to talk about your personal glass ceiling, where if you hit that thing, then you're going to get right up to where you think you can be, but then drop it back down because, oh, that's too high. I can't possibly.
Mhm.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
So, yeah, more of that crap and more head trash, which is Alice's specialty. So,
Yeah.
I'm going to just let her talk and I'll chime in here and there.
Well, I think again, this is one of those kind of concepts that almost goes contrary to what most of us have been taught about Christianity and beliefs because it flies in the face of a poverty type mindset where poverty is equated with holiness and godliness and all of those things. That there's some limit to God's goodness for you in your life. And if you've exceeded that, then obviously there's a problem and you need to shrink back down again. So, as opposed to perhaps this is God blessing you and He actually has more for you than you could ever think or imagine, which might be a bit biblical. But this looks like, and for those of you that may not know, and the glass ceiling is kind of like it used to be more where women were only able to get so far up, and men were able to exceed that. Women had a glass ceiling is kind of where the you can see beyond it, but it's there. It's a literal barrier. And this is the same kind of thing, but it's internal with us. It tends not to be external as much, although there are external forces. Obviously there are external cultural belief systems and that kind of thing that influence our beliefs about the amount of success. And this is something that is very much going to depend on where you are in the world. Just like in Australia, they have what they call the tall poppy syndrome. And that is kind of like if somebody is standing up beyond everybody else, then everybody else's job is to whack them back down to size.
Crabs in a bucket analogy, too.
Yep, same exact thing.
Yeah.
So, um,
And not even in Christianity. I think just even
mhm,
in the world, there's a lot of societal programming that just wants you to be a cog in the machine
yeah,
rather
no,
than.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that this is, fair warning, I'm a rank capitalist. But that is something inherent in socialism and communism, and which is partly why I think that those are not godly systems at all, because it requires a sameness and it requires you to stay at the same level as everybody else, which is way below anybody's um, abilities, skills, giftings. Nobody's able to really do what they're gifted and called to do because they have to fit in their little thing, just like everybody else. So
That's good.
yeah, I so that's my small slice of political commentary. um, but we are more concerned. So just yeah, as Seneca said, be aware that we're talking about this in the context of Christianity, but there are these forces out there just in general. So, and depending on your cultural background, where you are from in the world, you may struggle with this in some areas versus not in others. Um, so take that in mind when you're looking through these kinds of things. Is this something that my society has taught me, or and that I need to overcome?
Parents.
Yeah, your parents. There's a, a lot of we're taught this a lot more than or it's caught more than taught, I guess I should say.
Mhm.
Most of the time, um, sometimes, yeah, people say make comments or whatever, but most of the time it's observable behavior that this is the way everybody does it. And who are you to
Yeah.
think you can do something else? So
Right.
um,
Well,
which
and that was so much of, there's a certain age group of the population out there that is parents and grandparents that You
Mhm.
know, their whole thing was you get a good job, you stay in the good job, you retire, and then you do what you want to do.
Yeah.
And there is no tolerance for risk.
Mhm.
So, we have a lot of that drummed into us, at least a lot of us do. I know that was
Yeah.
true for me.
Yeah. Um, and I think, well, that's probably a total rabbit hole, but just with a lot of the shifts and changes that are happening globally, economically, and with uh, and here in the United States with inflation and kind of a lot of um, insecurity in ways that we as a country have not known in a long time, and how badly, like how much of this is fear mongering, how much of this is going to be reality, we don't know. um, but I wonder and suspect that some of these kind of inherent things, that's where a lot of that came from our parents and our grandparents, was because of the
Mhm.
insecurities that they experienced in the Great Depression. From what I've heard, we're not heading for another one of those, and we're definitely praying that we don't. So, but I think probably this would be a good time to be more aware of those types of influences in your life, because that they may be getting triggered. Just kind of that epigenetic trauma, if there's
Yeah.
any of that in your system. So,
Mm.
so watch for that as you're going through, which is a little bit of a side detour. For what we
It
want.
is, but it's at the same point, it's like, okay, now is the time when we need everybody to rise up into the fullness of who they are and put their solutions that God gave them out into the world and
Yeah.
stop playing small.
Yeah, and I think, and partly how I tend to deal with um, uncertainty and risk is I take a look at, okay, what's the worst that can happen? So,
Mm.
um, and if I decide that, oh, well, the worst that can happen is this, and I'm okay with that, like that is not all that horrible, then fine, I just jump right on in.
Yeah.
And I
Will
think,
I survive this? Yes. Okay then.
yeah, yeah, is so then the risk is worth it to me. Or I can also see, are there ways to mitigate that risk if I'm not willing to do that? Are there ways that I can, mitigate that, so that it isn't as risky as it might be otherwise for whatever decision. And I think that even so partly just with all of this um, uncertainty in the atmosphere, I've kind of been doing a little bit of research, and I'm trying to find more sources for more specifics and more concrete data. But even in the Great Depression, I was looking that up. It's the unemployment rate, I think I read, was 25%, which is bad. That's very high. Not saying that that's a good thing, but that's still 75% of the people are working. They have jobs. And, my perception was that like no one had a job, no one was working, no one was making money, there were more millionaires made during that time than at any other point in history. I think adjusted for inflation and all the things that they do to statistics with money over time. Now I don't know if the dot-com era and bubble disrupted that number or whatever, but that's so partly for me it's thinking, okay, well, in whatever. So one of the things I've been researching is what makes the difference, like why, and a lot of the people, the companies that survived and thrived and made a lot more money were because their mindset was, yes, this is here, but it won't always be here. And so I'm going to make decisions not based on what's happening right now, but what I anticipate will be happening soon. So, and that's, they continue to advertise, they continue to innovate and discover new technologies and new ways of doing things, and all those kind of things. And they were positioned well that when people had more money, they were top of mind and they made a lot of money. So so that's kind of the thing, I think, in dealing with upper limit beliefs is partly to I think this, like the economic situations adds another layer of complexity to that, because if you believe that God is punishing America, or he's punishing us, or he's punishing, whatever for this, then if you think that God gave something to you, either the thorn in your flesh or he's keeping you down so you can stay humble, or those kinds of things, then you have kind of cut yourself off at the knees as far as dealing with it. Because if God gave it to you, then you're stuck. So versus, does that align with the character of God that's revealed in Scripture? And it's not. So not always did have God's people had an excessive abundance of things, but the Israelites were slaves for 400 years, and they wandered around the desert for 40 more, and their clothes didn't wear out, their shoes didn't, and evidently, because there were kids, they grew, so evidently the shoes and the clothes grew with the kids, I guess. So, or they had a very interesting hand-me-down system, I'm not sure. But they also had enough random gold that they were able to give it to Aaron to build the golden calf. So, and they had all the resources to build the tabernacle in the wilderness. So even in that time, they weren't, life was unstable, I guess, but it wasn't, they weren't starving. They weren't, hurting for money. I mean, I have zero idea how big that golden calf was, but I assume it was quite large. So they've been schlepping around that gold the whole time.
Wow. Yeah.
So look at, if you're, some of the things to watch for with the the upper limit belief. If you kind of get to a certain level of like income or success, however you define that, because again, this is going to depend on you. It's going to depend on what you're doing, and that kind of thing. Like to make 60 grand a year might be somebody's glass ceiling, whereas for somebody else it might be 6 million. The kind of core issue is still the same, even though the numbers are different. So don't necessarily think that, oh, it's always at 150 grand or whatever a year. Just watch out for ways that you're self-sabotaging in order to bring yourself back down. If you've got, this is like your level of, I'm okay being successful to this point, and you start going beyond that, and watch for it not just in the same category of life or area of life that you're, so if we're talking about business success, so don't, are you starting to pick fights with your spouse or your family, or you kicking the dog more, or what other things are you doing to self-sabotage your success in that, in life as a whole, if that makes sense? Because to a certain extent, if you've got great family, great marriage, great whatever, and then you hit a certain place financially, kind of the classic midlife crisis for guys, that they used to always talk to, the guys aren't the only ones that do that, but that tends to be kind of just like the classic cliche, where he goes and off and divorces his wife and marries a secretary and buys a fast car or whatever. But that's sorry?
If you have that subconscious belief in there that being successful is going to sabotage your relationships, then you're probably going to make sure that happens.
Yeah. So if you start noticing that that's happening, then, get thee to a counselor and get those things addressed. Because God has all good things for you. So he doesn't, and humility is not
sorrow to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, humility is not about having less of things. So there isn't an equation where that equals humility. So um, so um, hopefully we've given you kind of a lot to think about as just in general, and discovering upper limit beliefs, but also watching for those prevalent messages that may be cropping back up, that may be affecting you more now just because of what's happening in the culture at large, and the financial situation. So if you have, and I mentioned this last time, but again, if you need specific tools as far as what kind of negative emotions, negative roots are impacting you at this time, you can take a quick quiz on my website, emotionalandspiritualhealing.com, and it's at the top of the page. And it will give you free and paid resources of various sorts. So you can take a look at those and see if you can get some healing and get past that. So.
And we cover this stuff in a lot more depth in our year-long class for business. It's Foundations for Supernatural Business Growth at supernaturalbiz.com.
Absolutely. So in part of that class, you have access to a mastermind group. And so that's kind of one of those areas that if you're getting on there we have meetings, Zoom meetings together twice a month. And if you're getting on there every time, oh yeah, I was going to do that last time, still haven't done it. If that happens a couple of times, then you might want to take a look and see what's happening. So we'll talk to y'all later.